Can you believe it? For the first time in decades, Germany is no longer a promised land, but has become a gigantic departure station. In just the year 2025, the population of this country decreased by 100,000 people, as the influx of immigrants was no longer enough to compensate for the natural decline. Even more terrifying, for every 5 people living in Germany, one is now actively searching for a way out. That silence is spreading from industrial centers to forgotten coastal regions. And in 2026, the world suddenly realized something shocking. 10 once powerful German cities are quietly transforming into modern ghost towns. Not because of war, not because of natural disaster, but because people themselves are leaving. Millions are voting with their feet. And perhaps nowhere exposes this collapse more painfully than Dortmund. Once known as the steel heartbeat of the Ruhr region, Dortmund represented the strength of Germany's industrial miracle. Factories roared, workers filled the streets, economic confidence felt untouchable. But by 2026, that confidence has started evaporating. Dortmund now carries one of the worst demographic balances in Western Germany. For every child born, more than 3 people die. The city is aging faster than it can replace itself, and the young workforce, the only engine capable of sustaining the system, is quietly disappearing. Why? Because reality elsewhere simply looks better. Young professionals moving abroad can often earn nearly $100 to $100 more per month in countries like Switzerland or Austria. And increasingly, they are asking the same dangerous question. Why stay? Germany once sold itself as Europe's model of stability, efficient bureaucracy, reliable infrastructure, economic opportunity, but that image is beginning to crack. Administrative systems still move painfully slowly in the digital age. Business owners describe opening companies as a bureaucratic nightmare consuming months of paperwork before earning a single euro. That inefficiency now costs Germany billions annually, and startups are suffocating before they even begin. Meanwhile, across Germany, nearly 4,900 retail stores are expected to close. Not temporary closures, permanent disappearance. And in cities like Dortmund, once busy shopping streets are slowly becoming hollow corridors lined with empty windows. But the most dangerous part is psychological. Because once people stop believing a city has a future, the decline accelerates rapidly. That is exactly what is happening now. Dortmund increasingly feels less like a growing city and more like a giant retirement zone struggling to maintain itself. Over 20% of the population is already above 65 years old, and entire neighborhoods now depend heavily on aging residents living on shrinking pensions. Public transportation weakens. Local businesses disappear. Healthcare systems strain under growing demand. And the younger generation watches all of this carefully, then leaves. But if Dortmund represents the collapse of old industry, Leipzig reveals something perhaps even more frightening, the collapse of illusion itself. For years, Leipzig was celebrated as Germany's creative paradise, affordable living, artistic energy, cheap rent, a city where young people could still dream affordably. The media even gave it a nickname, Leipzig. But by 2026, that dream is beginning to fall apart. Every year, nearly 27,000 people quietly leave the city. And despite endless construction projects, many outer districts now face rising vacancy rates. The irony is brutal. Speculative real estate expanded aggressively while the very creative class that made Leipzig attractive can no longer afford to remain there. Artists are leaving, young families are leaving, intellectuals are leaving, even basic infrastructure is collapsing under pressure. Parents struggle finding daycare spaces, medical appointment waiting times continue increasing, and healthcare shortages are quietly expanding across multiple districts. The city still looks modern from the outside. Cafes remain open, new buildings continue appearing, tourists still visit, but underneath the surface, the emotional energy that once made Leipzig special is fading quickly. And perhaps that reveals the deeper crisis spreading across Germany itself. The country still looks functional from a distance. The trains still move, the factories still operate, the lights still turn on. But beneath that image, something fundamental is weakening. The belief that the next generation will enjoy a better future than the previous one. And once that belief disappears, people begin searching for exits instead of opportunities. Germany is not collapsing overnight. That's not how modern societies fail. Instead, they slowly hollow out from within, one graduate at a time, one family at a time, one empty city block at a time. If Dortmund represented the collapse of industry and Leipzig exposed the collapse of illusion, then Chemnitz reveals something even more disturbing, a city slowly being consumed by silence itself. By 2026, Chemnitz no longer feels like a city preparing for the future. It feels like a waiting room for the past. The average age here is approaching 47 years old, among the highest in Germany. And every year, the silence grows louder, children disappear from neighborhoods, schools shrink, entire apartment blocks stand half empty, and despite some of the cheapest rents in the country, Young people still refuse to stay, because nobody moves somewhere simply because it is inexpensive. People move toward hope, opportunity, energy, and increasingly, Chemnitz offers very little of those things. More than 20% of young residents between 14 and 29 openly express plans to leave as soon as possible, not because they hate the city, but because they fear becoming trapped inside it. The brightest engineering graduates leave almost immediately for Western Germany, Switzerland, or Austria, where salaries are dramatically higher, and every departure weakens the city further. Because when educated youth leave, the future leaves with them. Businesses continue struggling to replace aging workers. Factories remain standing physically, but the next generation needed to operate them is disappearing. And this creates something terrifying. A city functioning economically on paper while emotionally collapsing underneath. The consequences spread everywhere. Healthcare systems strain under rising elderly demand. Mental health problems increase. Social isolation becomes normalized. And entire neighborhoods begin feeling abandoned even before they are officially empty. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part is this. Many residents no longer speak about building futures here. They speak about enduring decline, surviving it, managing it. And once survival replaces ambition, urban collapse accelerates rapidly. But if Chemnitz represents silence, then Magdeburg represents contradiction. Because in Magdeburg, Germany created something bizarre, a city simultaneously full and empty at the same time. Massive development projects continue rising across parts of the city, while older neighborhoods slowly decay around them. The vacancy rate now fluctuates between 5 and 9%, far beyond what urban economists consider healthy. And yet, construction continues. It feels almost surreal, as if the city is desperately trying to advertise growth while quietly losing residents underneath the surface. And perhaps the biggest victims are the middle class. High-income professionals increasingly leave Germany entirely for Switzerland or Austria, where taxes feel lighter and salaries significantly higher. They leave behind a shrinking tax base, supporting increasingly expensive infrastructure. And that creates a dangerous spiral, because fewer residents means higher costs distributed across fewer people. Public transportation becomes more expensive. Utilities become more expensive. Healthcare becomes harder to sustain. Everything becomes heavier for those remaining behind. Meanwhile, Germany's digital infrastructure problems continue worsening frustration. Many residents describe parts of Eastern Germany as functioning like telecommunications museums trapped in another decade. Slow internet, delayed modernization, endless bureaucracy. And for younger generations raised in a hyper-connected world, that stagnation feels unbearable, so they leave too. But nowhere does the emotional collapse feel more painful than Halle, because Halle no longer looks like a city losing people. It looks like a city losing society itself. Vacancy rates in some districts now approach nearly 9%. Entire neighborhoods feel frozen in time. You can walk for several minutes without seeing another person, without hearing another voice. The small businesses that once kept communities alive are disappearing rapidly. Cafes close, local shops vanish, community centers struggle surviving. And with every closure, human connection weakens further. The city is experiencing a brutal brain drain. Roughly 75% of university-educated migrants leaving Halle move primarily for better income opportunities elsewhere. And once the educated middle class disappears, the support structure holding society together weakens dangerously. Single mothers face rising poverty. Healthcare systems become overwhelmed. Schools close because there are not enough children remaining. Even public gardens fall into neglect. And this reveals something modern societies rarely admit openly. A city can survive economic recession. It can survive political instability. It can even survive war. But surviving hopelessness is much harder, because once enough people emotionally disconnect from a place, the collapse becomes self-sustaining. The strong leave first, then the hopeful, then eventually, only those without options remain behind. Germany still possesses enormous wealth, powerful industries, advanced infrastructure, global influence, but these ghost cities expose a deeper problem no economic report fully captures. A growing number of Germans no longer believe prosperity automatically belongs to the next generation. And when belief in the future disappears, even the strongest economies begin hollowing out from within. If Chemnitz felt like silence and Halle felt like abandonment, then Gelsenkirchen feels like something even darker, a city where poverty is no longer temporary hardship, but a permanent urban identity. There was a time when this city symbolized German industrial pride. Coal mines burned day and night, factories operated endlessly. Workers believed their children would inherit something stronger than what came before. But by 2026, that belief has almost vanished. Today, nearly 20% of the population in Gelsenkirchen faces the risk of poverty, one of the highest rates anywhere in Western Germany. And the urban landscape itself now reflects that reality brutally. Luxury stores disappeared long ago. Then ordinary businesses vanish too. What remains are survival economies, food assistance centers, secondhand shops. social welfare offices crowded from morning until night. People are not leaving Gelsenkirchen searching for adventure. They are fleeing exhaustion, the feeling that no matter how hard they work, they can never move forward. Inflation and energy prices have hit this city especially hard. For many households, basic survival now consumes nearly everything: heating, food, rent, transportation. There is barely anything left afterward, and once financial stress becomes permanent, something deeper begins collapsing too. Human dignity, hope, community trust. Crime rises inside neglected housing complexes, mental health deteriorates, public frustration transforms into anger, and extremist political movements begin gaining influence among people who feel abandoned by the system itself. This is the dangerous side effect modern economies rarely discuss openly. When large industrial transitions happen too quickly, entire communities can become economically stranded, and perhaps nowhere illustrates that more clearly than Cottbus. For decades, coal sustained this region. It provided jobs, identity, stability. Families built entire lives around the industry. Then Germany accelerated its green transition. And suddenly, everything changed. The coal industry began disappearing faster than replacement jobs could realistically emerge. Politicians promised green economic transformation, technology hubs, new opportunities, a sustainable future. But for many workers in Cottbus, those promises still exist mostly on paper. Thousands of skilled workers began leaving in search of stable employment elsewhere. Young people looked around and saw uncertainty instead of opportunity. And once young families begin leaving consistently, cities age rapidly. Cottbus now faces one of Germany's fastest aging rates. Entire neighborhoods increasingly resemble retirement zones rather than functioning mixed-generation communities. Cafes close because younger customers disappear, bookstores vanish, entertainment districts weaken. The emotional energy of the city drains slowly away. Perhaps the most painful part is the generational separation now emerging. Grandparents remain behind guarding empty homes while younger relatives relocate to Berlin, Munich, or entirely outside Germany. Families stay connected mostly through phone screens and money transfers. And this raises a difficult question. What is the real price of economic transformation? Because transitioning toward cleaner industries may protect the environment long term, but entire communities are being sacrificed during the process. Germany is attempting to save the future from carbon emissions, but many residents increasingly feel the present is collapsing around them first. And if Cottbus represents the collapse of industrial transition, then Gera represents something perhaps even more frightening: neglect. Because Gera no longer feels like a city fighting decline. It feels like a city erased from national priority entirely. After German reunification in 1990, many eastern cities struggled heavily. But by 2026, Gera's wounds appear deeper than ever. Investment continues flowing into neighboring cities, while Gera repeatedly receives promises without meaningful transformation. Vacancy rates remain dangerously high. Population decline continues accelerating. And many residents describe living there as feeling invisible. The city still repairs roads, maintains parks, keeps public buildings operating. But increasingly, there are fewer people left to use them. That creates an almost surreal atmosphere. Infrastructure without vitality, public space without community, a functioning city physically, but emotionally hollow. Libraries struggle surviving on tiny budgets. Museums operate with limited visitors. Public services weaken gradually as tax revenues continue shrinking. And residents increasingly describe themselves as second-class citizens within their own country. This is perhaps the deepest fear spreading across parts of Germany now. Not sudden collapse, not disaster, but slow irrelevance. The terrifying possibility that entire cities may continue existing physically while quietly disappearing economically and socially. Germany still remains one of the most powerful economies on Earth, but these cities reveal a painful truth hiding beneath the statistics. Modern societies do not fail all at once. They hollow out gradually, neighborhood by neighborhood, industry by industry, generation by generation. And once enough people emotionally give up on a place, recovery becomes far harder than politicians are willing to admit. For decades, Germany was viewed as Europe's unstoppable economic engine, a country built on precision, discipline, engineering, and industrial dominance. But by 2026, cracks are spreading through that machine faster than most people ever imagined, and nowhere exposes that collapse more painfully than Wolfsburg, a city once entirely powered by one name: Volkswagen. For generations, Volkswagen was not just a company. It was the heartbeat of the city itself. Factories operated endlessly. Workers built stable, middle-class lives. Entire neighborhoods survived because car production never seemed capable of slowing down. But then the global automotive world changed, fast. China accelerated electric vehicle manufacturing aggressively. Competition intensified. Consumer behavior shifted. And suddenly, Germany's old industrial model looked frighteningly vulnerable. By 2026, Volkswagen reported devastating profit declines, while suppliers like Bosch and ZF began reducing operations aggressively. And once the supply chain weakens, everything surrounding it begins collapsing too. Restaurants lose customers, retail spending falls, housing demand weakens, nightlife disappears. Entire sections of the city begin feeling emotionally abandoned after sunset. More than 14,000 automotive workers now face the risk of long-term unemployment across parts of Germany's manufacturing belt. And the deeper problem is terrifying. Many workers spent decades mastering skills tied specifically to combustion engine manufacturing. Now the world is moving toward electric systems, requiring completely different expertise. Retraining sounds simple in political speeches. Reality feels very different at age 55, especially when global competitors are already producing cheaper vehicles at enormous scale. This is not just economic disruption, it is identity collapse. Because Germany built its modern pride around industrial mastery, engineering excellence, automotive perfection. And now that confidence is shaking visibly, the consequences extend far beyond factories themselves. Property markets weaken around shrinking industrial zones. Young professionals increasingly avoid committing long-term to cities dependent on one struggling industry. And investors are noticing too. Roughly 72% of German businesses have already reduced domestic investment plans, according to recent projections. That statistic alone reveals something deeply alarming. Even German companies are becoming less confident in Germany. And if Wolfsburg represents the collapse of industrial confidence, then Bremerhaven represents the collapse of geographic security itself. Because this port city now faces two crises simultaneously: economic decline and environmental fear. For decades, Bremerhaven depended heavily on maritime trade flowing through German ports. But global shipping instability, trade fragmentation, and declining cargo volumes are weakening the region aggressively. Major shipping firms already reported severe profit declines as global trade slowed. And when fewer ships arrive, entire local economies begin suffocating quietly. Restaurants close, hotels weaken, small logistics companies disappear. But perhaps the most frightening issue is happening near the coastline itself. People are starting to leave not because they want to, but because they fear staying too long. Sea level concerns and rising insurance costs are creating growing anxiety across coastal communities. Insurance premiums continue increasing sharply. Some residents already fear their homes may become financially unsustainable long before physical flooding ever occurs. And investors notice these risks immediately because capital hates uncertainty, especially long-term environmental uncertainty. That is why some waterfront districts now increasingly resemble frozen memories of prosperity rather than growing economic zones. The restaurants still stand, the buildings still exist, but emotionally, the future already feels uncertain. And perhaps that perfectly summarizes Germany's deeper crisis in 2026. This is no longer simply about population decline, or industrial transition, or demographic aging. It is about something more psychological: the collapse of certainty itself. For decades, Germans believed hard work guaranteed stability, that engineering guaranteed prosperity, that institutions guaranteed order. But younger generations increasingly no longer believe those promises automatically apply anymore. Many are choosing Switzerland, Austria, Canada, Scandinavia, anywhere they believe opportunity feels more dynamic and less burdened by stagnation, and every departure creates another invisible crack inside the system. Germany is not collapsing overnight. The trains still move, the factories still operate, the lights still turn on. But the emotional foundation beneath the system is weakening gradually, and that may ultimately prove far more dangerous than any short-term recession. Because nations survive economic downturns all the time, what becomes harder to survive is when people stop believing the future belongs there anymore. The ghost towns emerging across Germany are not merely abandoned places. They are warnings. Warnings about what happens when industrial empires fail to adapt emotionally as quickly as the world changes economically. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all is this: if even Germany can begin hollowing out from within, who is truly safe next?